The girl came out of the wreckage already talking. That was the first thing Mariana Reyes noticed. Not the burn patterns scorched across the highway, not the halo of shattered glass catching the headlights of her SUV, not the crater punched clean through 3 lanes of asphalt, like something very large and very fast had decided the road was an obstacle rather than a surface. She noticed the girl, 7 years old, maybe 8, standing at the edge of the debris field, in a white dress that should have been soaked red but wasn't. Her bare feet on the broken ground, her eyes open, her mouth moving in steady, deliberate syllables that Mariana couldn't hear yet over the wind. Mariana was out of the vehicle before it fully stopped. Behind her she could hear Tomas swearing, the passenger door catching on something, the crunch of his boots as he hit the pavement. She didn't wait for him. She crossed the debris field at a run, hopping a twisted axle, ducking under a sagging guardrail section. And when she reached the girl, she dropped to one knee and got level with her face, and looked into eyes that were the exact color of deep water, and completely, profoundly calm. "Hey," Mariana said. "Hey, can you hear me? Are you hurt?" The girl kept talking. The syllables weren't Spanish. They weren't any language Mariana had ever processed in the field, and she'd processed a lot of them. 3 years with the Institute's extraction team, 2 more running her own division. Enough field time to have heard people in crisis in 17 languages across 9 countries. This was none of those. It had the rhythm of language, the breath-pause-breath cadence of something being recited from memory, something important, something the girl was absolutely certain she needed to say. Mariana put both hands gently on the girl's shoulders. "I've got you. You're safe. You can stop now." The girl stopped. She looked at Mariana with those watercolored eyes and said, in perfect, unaccented Spanish, "They already know we're here." Then she sat down on the asphalt and went to sleep. The Institute didn't have an official name in any government registry. If you pulled the tax documentation, you'd find a technology holding company called OWAL Tech, incorporated in Mexico City, with subsidiaries in agricultural data management and satellite telemetry processing. The building on Cal Insurgentes looked like every other corporate office building on that block. Glass, steel, a lobby with a security desk, and a visitor log that was never actually reviewed. The floors that mattered were underground. Mariana had worked there for 8 years. She still sometimes stood in the elevator going down and felt the mild cognitive dissonance of it. The ordinary fluorescent ceiling of the cab, the chime of passing floors. The long pause before the doors opened onto something that was very definitely not ordinary corporate infrastructure. Dr. Villard was waiting for her when she brought the girl in. He was a small man, 60s, with the very still quality of someone who had stopped being surprised by things a long time ago, and had made a kind of peace with that. He wore a white coat that was more habit than necessity, and glasses he didn't actually need for vision. They were readers, and he was always forgetting to take them off. He looked at the girl, who was now awake and sitting on a gurney, eating a hospital-grade nutrition bar, with the focused intensity of someone working through a technical problem. "She spoke," Mariana said. "In the field, something we haven't cataloged." Then she switched to Spanish. "What did she say?" "That they already know we're here." Villard made a small sound. Not alarm, not dismissal, something in between. He sat down across from the girl and folded his hands in his lap and waited. The girl finished the nutrition bar. She looked at him with that same underwater calm. "You study them," she said. "The signals, the crash sites, we do," Villard said. "You've been doing it for 11 years. 12, he said. "Almost 13 now." "You found the Chiapas glyph." Villardi went very still. The Chiapas glyph was not in any report, any file, any database that an 8-year-old girl in a white dress should have had access to. It was not something anyone outside the 3rd sub-level of this building should have known existed. It was a sequence of carved stone symbols discovered by their field team in 2001, inside a sealed Mayan chamber, that had never appeared in any archaeological survey, in a region so remote it took their people 4 days of jungle transit to reach it. Symbols that matched, with a precision that made several of their analysts quit and take jobs in unrelated fields, a modulated radio frequency their satellite array had been detecting intermittently since 1997. "Tell me about the glyph," Villard said quietly. "It's a warning," the girl said, "but not the kind you think." Mariana spent the next 6 hours reviewing crash site data from the last 8 months. There had been 11 incidents. Not all of them looked like incidents from the outside. A power grid fluctuation in Oaxaca, a series of unexplained animal deaths in a 2-kilometer radius around a lake in Sonora, a meteor impact near the Yucatan coast that the astronomy community had catalogued as unremarkable and moved on from. Her team had flagged all 11. What she was looking for now was a pattern in the timing. She found it at 3 in the morning. The incidents were accelerating, not randomly. They followed a precise exponential curve, intervals shrinking by a factor of roughly 1.4 each time. If the pattern held and her model said it held, the next event was 41 hours away. The one after that 29, after that 20. She put the curve on the main display and stood back and looked at it. Tomas came in with 2 coffees and stopped when he saw the screen. "That's not a natural distribution," he said. "No. It's a countdown. It's a countdown," she agreed. He handed her a coffee. She took it and didn't drink it. They stood there looking at the curve together. And Mariana thought about the girl's eyes and the way she'd said, "They already know we're here," without any particular fear in it. As if it were simply a fact that needed to be communicated. Like a weather report, like a train schedule. "Pull the Sonora Lake data," she said. "All of it. I want the spectral analysis from the animal tissue samples." "I did that already," Tomas said. He pulled up the results on the secondary monitor. "There's something I need you to see." The tissue samples from the animals around the Sonora Lake showed cellular degradation consistent with high-frequency electromagnetic exposure. Standard interpretation would be proximity to some kind of pulse emitter, something military or industrial. Mariana had read that interpretation and flagged it as incomplete. What Tomas was showing her now was the deeper analysis, the molecular layer, the protein structures. "The degradation pattern," she said. "It's not random. It's sequential," he said. "It starts at the cellular boundary, works inward. Like something testing the architecture, measuring load tolerance." She set down the coffee. "That's not a weapon," she said. "That's a diagnostic." Tomas said nothing. She could see in his face that he'd reached the same conclusion 3 hours ago and had been deciding how to say it. "They were testing to see how much we break," she said, "before the actual load." The girl's name, as far as anyone could determine, was Esperanza. She had no record in any national registry, no birth certificate, no family who had reported her missing. Mariana had 4 separate inquiries running through every relevant database in the country, and all 4 had come back empty. She was simply a girl who appeared in the wreckage of an event they couldn't fully explain, speaking in a language that their best computational linguist, brought in on an emergency basis at 5 in the morning, was describing as possibly pre-Columbian in root structure, but with phonological features that have no analog in any recorded human language. Mariana sat with her in the medical bay while the linguist worked. Esperanza was drawing on a notepad, not pictures exactly, more like diagrams. Overlapping circles, spiraling lines, shapes that seemed to organize themselves around a central point that the girl kept returning to, kept adjusting, kept refining the way you refine a calculation when you know the answer, but you're working out how to show someone else the steps. "Can I ask you something?" Mariana said. Esperanza's didn't look up. "Yes. How do you know about the Institute, about our work?" The girl was quiet for a moment, still drawing. "The same way water knows the shape of the jar," she said. "I was held in it long enough." Mariana looked at the drawing, the central point, the expanding rings. "The warning in the glyph," she said. "Tell me what it actually says." Esperanza set down her pencil and looked at Mariana with those patient, ancient water eyes. "It says, the species that survives the census is the one that knows it is being counted." The 3rd sublevel had a room they called the library, which was not a library in any conventional sense. It was a server room that had been partially converted to analog storage when they realized certain kinds of information held better on physical media. That there was something about the act of writing by hand that the people who built this place had understood, and that the current generation was only now beginning to relearn. One entire wall was shelves of notebooks, hand-labeled by date and researcher, going back to 1993. Villard spent the morning in the library with Esperanza's drawing, reproduced on paper, in front of him, and the Chiapas glyph photographs spread across the table. He found it at 11 o'clock. Not a match, not a direct correspondence, but a harmonic. The glyph contained a sequence that he had always read as astronomical, as a star map of some kind, because the scale suggested celestial distances. Now looking at the central point and ring structure of Esperanza's diagram, he reread the sequence and understood that it wasn't a map of the sky at all. It was a map of the census. The rings were populations. The central point was not a star. It was a threshold. The glyph was saying, when you reach the center, you are visible. When you are visible, the count begins. When the count ends, He went upstairs and found Mariana. The glyph is a survival manual, he said. Left here by something that had already been counted. Already been through it. They left it for whoever came next. Who left it, she asked. He took off his glasses and cleaned them on his coat, which meant he was buying time to formulate something that didn't have a comfortable shape. The Mayan civilization, he said, declined extremely rapidly by historical standards. No adequate external explanation has ever been agreed upon. There were surviving populations, but the high-complexity urban centers, the ones with astronomical observatories, with the most sophisticated calendrical systems, with the deepest records, those went dark first. Villard. Something counted them, he said, and found them insufficient or threatening or simply in the way. And something else, something that had survived its own census, tried to warn them 6 species in line. He handed her his notes. She read them. She read them again. We're the next species in line, she said. The countdown you found last night, he said. That's not a countdown to an attack. It's the final calibration phase of a census instrument. They're not coming to destroy us. They're coming to decide. Tomas pulled Mariana aside in the corridor outside the library. The Sonora Lake samples, he said. I ran the deep analysis again. The frequency signature in the tissue. I cross-referenced it with our satellite array data. We've been receiving that exact frequency from the same deep space source since 1997. We thought it was background. We labeled it as a pulsar artifact and moved on. It wasn't background. It's a carrier signal, he said. Something has been broadcasting continuously for at least 27 years. Maybe longer. That's just how far back our archive goes. Mariana leaned against the corridor wall. The fluorescent light above them hummed faintly. They've been watching us since before the Institute existed, she said. Probably since before that, he said. But 27 years ago something changed in the signal. The modulation became more complex, more focused. He paused. 27 years ago is roughly when global telecommunications density crossed the threshold where we became difficult to ignore, when the electromagnetic footprint of human civilization became impossible to miss from any reasonable distance. We got loud, she said. We got very loud, he said, and something heard us, and started paying closer attention. She thought about the Chiapas glyph, sealed in its chamber for 1,000 years, waiting for whoever found it. She thought about the people who had carved it. The ones with the observatories. The ones who had been watching the sky long enough to know something was watching back. Who had understood what that meant, and left a warning in stone, because stone is what survives. She thought about the girl sitting in the medical bay, drawing diagrams, speaking in a language that was almost but not quite human. Thomas, she said, when you were a kid, did you ever do something just to see if you could? Not because it was useful or safe or approved. Just because you needed to know if you were capable of it. He looked at her. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that whatever is out there has been watching us long enough to know we're loud. Long enough to run diagnostics on our tissue samples. Long enough to study the Mayan calendar and understand that someone here already knows the rules. She pushed off the wall. I don't think they expected us to have the manual. The fourth incident in the accelerating sequence hit at 2 in the afternoon, 40 kilometers south of the city. Another crash site, another crater, but this one had something the others hadn't. It was still warm, radiating faintly at the edges of the debris field. Mariana's team reached it in 40 minutes. She was out of the vehicle before it stopped again. Crouching at the crater edge, her instruments out, reading. The frequency signature was identical to the Sonora samples. But there was something else. At the center of the crater, partially buried, was an object about the size and rough shape of a large stone. Smooth, dark, with an iridescent quality that shifted when you moved around it, like oil on water, like the surface of something that was not quite matter in any way she had a good word for. And carved into its surface, or not carved, exactly, more like expressed, like the shapes had always been there, and the object had simply organized itself around them, was a sequence of symbols. She took photographs. She took samples of the surrounding soil. She stood at the edge and looked at the object for a long time, long enough for the light to change around her, for Tomas to come stand beside her, for the two of them to breathe the smell of ozone and scorched earth, and something else beneath that, something green and electric, something that reminded her, absurdly, of the air just before a thunderstorm over the mountains where she'd grown up, that clean, sharp smell of the world about to break open. It looks like the glyph chamber, Tomas said quietly. The shape of the room, the way the symbols are laid out. It's not a weapon, she said. It's a message. Can you read it? She thought about Esperanza's diagram, the rings expanding from the center point. "I think," she said, "it's a question." They brought the object back. The linguist worked through the night on the symbol sequence with Esperanza sitting across the table from him. And what emerged over the following hours was not so much a translation as a negotiation. The linguist had a framework of phonological systems, a career of pattern recognition. Esperanza had something else, something that operated below language. And between the two of them they built a bridge across a gap that should not have been bridgeable. By 4 in the morning they had something. The sequence was not a single message. It was a conditional structure, an if-then, the fundamental architecture of any sufficiently complex communication system, the grammar of decision. The first part established the terms of the census. Species capable of high-complexity information processing, currently in exponential technological expansion, assessed for long-term trajectory and resource consumption pattern, compared against a catalog of prior assessments. The second part was the question it asked, and Mariana read the linguist's transcription 3 times before she accepted that she was reading it correctly. Not about military capability, not about population density, not about any of the metrics she had been half expecting the arbiters of an interstellar census to care about. It asked, "What do you do with the ones who cannot keep up?" She set the paper down. She understood. This was the test, not of strength, not of intelligence, not in the narrow computational sense. The diagnostics on the animal tissue, the 11 incidents, the countdown, all of it was calibration, establishing baseline capability, confirming that the species in question had reached the relevant threshold of complexity. That was the easy part. Any sufficiently loud civilization could pass the threshold test by accident, by sheer momentum, by the compounding logic of exponential growth. The question was about what you did with the remainder, with the ones left behind by that growth. The ones in the places your satellites couldn't reach, the ones speaking languages your computers hadn't cataloged, the ones your economists hadn't included in the models because they were inconvenient variables, the ones who carved warnings in stone for the next species because they knew they weren't going to survive to deliver the message in person. She went to find Villard. He was in the library again. He'd been there since midnight, and he'd pulled every notebook from the last 12 years and stacked them on the table in front of him. A cairn of recorded attention, of accumulated care. Every field report from every crash site, every signal analysis, every tissue sample, every measurement of every anomaly that anyone in this building had decided was worth writing down by hand because it mattered enough to want it to survive. He looked up when she came in. He'd already read the transcription. She could see it in his face. Not fear exactly, but the expression of someone who has been carrying a suspicion for a long time and has just been told they were right. "The Mayans failed it," he said. "We don't know that," she said. "The ones with the observatories, the ones who carved the glyph. They understood the question. They understood it well enough to leave the manual. But understanding the question isn't the same as answering it." He took off his glasses. The high-complexity centers went dark first, the most advanced populations. The ones who had grown the fastest, built the most, seen the furthest ahead. They were the first to go. "That's not an answer," Mariana said. "We can still answer it. In 41 hours. In less than that now," she said, "but yes." He looked at her. He had known her for 8 years. He had watched her develop from a field analyst who was good at pattern recognition into something harder to name. Someone who understood, at a level below methodology, that the patterns she was recognizing were not academic. Someone who had stopped asking, "Is this real?" and started asking, "What do we do about it?" "What are you going to do?" he said. She told him. It took 20 hours. Not the answer itself. The answer was, in some sense, already there, had been there in the accumulated work of every person in this building and a great many people outside it, who would never know their work was being cited in a response to an interstellar census question. The 20 hours were for the assembly. For pulling everything together into a form that matched the conditional structure of the question, if-then, premise conclusion, the grammar of decision. Tomas ran the signal analysis, identifying the exact frequency modulation of the carrier wave and establishing a transmission protocol that could load a complex symbolic sequence onto it. The linguist worked backward from the object's symbol system to construct a response vocabulary, not translation, but resonance, shapes that would mean the same things in both directions across the gap. Villard annotated everything, his handwriting filling margins, cross-referencing the glyph manual, flagging where the Mayan warning was applicable, and where human specificity required new formulation. And Mariana wrote the argument. She wrote it in plain Spanish first because plain language is how you test whether you actually understand what you're saying. She wrote about the network of community health workers in rural Oaxaca who reached populations that no government database had fully captured, who operated on almost no budget, who kept records in paper ledgers because the electricity was unreliable, who had been doing this for decades, not because it was efficient, but because the people in those communities were people. She wrote about the linguist who had spent 30 years documenting languages with fewer than 100 remaining speakers, not because there was a market for that documentation, not because anyone had commissioned it, but because the knowledge existed in those people, and knowledge is worth keeping. She wrote about Thomas, who had grown up in a border town that the national statistics treated as a footnote, who had taught himself signal analysis from library books and online courses, because the university in his region had closed the relevant department, who was now the best satellite analyst in the building. She wrote about the girl in the white dress who had walked out of a crash site talking. She wrote, "We lose people all the time. We lose them to poverty and distance and bureaucratic indifference, and the thousand other frictions of a civilization that is large and fast and not well designed for the ones at the edges. We know this. We have always known this. The question you are asking is not whether we lose people. We do, we are doing it right now as I write this. The question is whether we are trying, whether the trying is built into the structure of what we are, whether the effort to reach the ones who are hardest to reach is something we do as a rounding error on our main project, or whether it is, in some meaningful sense, the main project itself. A species with a stone chamber in the jungle, and a message in it from a civilization that didn't survive, left for us by people who spent resources they didn't have on a warning they would never know had been received. That is the answer to your question. Not the complete answer, not a solved problem, but evidence of direction, evidence of what we are trying to be. She read it back. She changed 3 words. She read it again, then she went and got Esperanza. The girl sat at the transmission console and looked at the screen where the encoded response was displayed in the symbol vocabulary the linguist had constructed. And she looked at it for a long time without speaking. Mariana stood behind her. The room was quiet enough that she could hear the building's ventilation system, the very faint hum of the servers in the next room, Tomas breathing steadily at the monitoring station to her left. "Is it right?" Mariana asked. "Does it say what I meant it to say?" Esperanza tilted her head the way she sometimes did, a gesture that seemed to belong to a different body than the one she was wearing. "There's a word missing," she said. "In the third conditional." "What word?" Esperanza picked up the stylus and added a symbol to the sequence, a single mark, small, in the margin of the third clause. "That word means, even when it costs us," she said. The statement was technically true without it, but incomplete. This makes it true in the way they need to hear. Mariana looked at the mark. Small, precise, marginal. "Send it," she said. Tomas sent it. Nothing happened immediately. Nothing dramatic. No signal return. No lights in the sky. No cessation of the accelerating incident sequence. Mariana had not expected anything immediate. She went and sat in the corridor outside the transmission room and drank the coffee that Tomas brought her, and she thought about what incomplete meant. Incomplete was not failure. Incomplete was where every honest answer to a hard question began. The Mayan astronomers in their observatories had understood something vast and terrifying and true, and had done the only thing available to them. They had written it down and sealed it in stone, and trusted the next ones to find it. They hadn't been able to answer the question themselves. They had done the prior work instead, the unglamorous, essential, invisible work of making the answer possible for whoever came after. She thought about her father, who had worked the same stretch of road in Guerrero for 30 years. The road that connected 3 villages too small for the maps. Who had known every family on it by name. Who had fixed that road out of his own pocket twice when the municipal budget ran dry. Who had never once described this as extraordinary or as sacrifice. Who would have found the framing strange. She thought. That is what I was trying to say, she thought. I think they heard it. The incident sequence continued. The next event came in 28 hours, as projected. A signature in the upper atmosphere over the Pacific, a frequency pulse that their satellite array caught and logged. Then the interval held at 28 hours for the next one, and the one after that. The exponential compression stopped. The countdown wasn't accelerating anymore. The census was still running, but it had paused at the calibration. Ballard found her in the library 3 days later, where she had been slowly, methodically reading every notebook in the stack, starting from 1993, reading field reports and analyses, and the careful hand-recorded measurements of every anomaly that had ever been considered worth writing down. It paused, he said. I know, it could mean 100 things, he said. It could, she agreed. But you think it means they're deliberating. I think it means they received the argument and they're taking it seriously, she said, which is all I ever asked for. You don't argue with something that size by being right. You argue with it by being genuine. He sat down across from her. He picked up one of the notebooks, 2003, filed by a field analyst named Rosario, who had spent 4 months documenting signal anomalies in Veracruz, and who had noted at the end of her final entry that the people in the communities around the primary anomaly site had known something was different about that patch of sky for generations, had names for it in the local dialect, had been watching it long enough to have folklore about it. We've been doing this, Villard said quietly. Paying attention, writing it down, building towards something we couldn't see the shape of. Yes, she said. Rosario is still in the field, he said. She's in Chiapas right now. She doesn't know what's happened here. She knows something's happened, Mariana said. She always knows. She just doesn't know the specifics yet. She paused. We should tell her. We should tell a lot of people, Villard said. Yes, she said, we should. Esperanza left on the 4th day. Not dramatically, there was no craft, no flash of light, no door opening in the wall of reality. She simply came to Mariana early in the morning, before the rest of the building was properly awake, and stood in the doorway of the office where Mariana had slept in her chair again, and said, I need to go. I know, Mariana said. The answer was good, Esperanza said. The word I added, they understood why it was necessary. The difference between we try and we try even when it costs us is the difference between a policy and a commitment. They needed to know which one you meant. Which one did they decide we meant? The girl was quiet for a moment. She had her notepad under her arm, the one she'd been drawing in all week. The pages filled with overlapping circles and the organizing central point. They decided, she said carefully, that you are still deciding, that the answer is not fixed yet, that there is evidence of direction. She tilted her head. That is a good answer. A better answer than most. They will watch for a while longer. How long? Until the evidence changes, she said. One way or another. Mariana stood up from the chair. She was stiff from sleeping badly, and the office was cold, and she was 43 years old and had been awake for most of the past 4 days. And she was, she realized, not afraid. She had been afraid for much of the past week. The cold, specific fear of the countdown. The larger and harder to name fear of the question and what a wrong answer might mean. But standing here now with the gray morning light coming in through the small window and the girl in the white dress in the doorway, she was not afraid. She held out her hand. Esperanza looked at it. Then she shifted the notepad to her other arm and took Mariana's hand and shook it, with a formal adult gravity that sat strangely on her 8-year-old face. As if she had seen the gesture in a film once and understood its function if not entirely its texture. Take care of the ones at the edges, Esperanza said. That's what we do, Mariana said. The girl nodded. She let go of Mariana's hand. She walked down the corridor toward the elevator, her bare feet quiet on the tile, and Mariana stood in the doorway of her office and watched her go. The elevator chimed. The doors opened. Esperanza stepped inside. The doors closed. Mariana stood in the corridor for a moment. Then she went to find Tomas, because the signal array would need monitoring, and the next community health report from Oaxaca was due, and Rosario needed to be briefed. And there was a notebook from 2007 she hadn't finished reading yet, and the work, the long, unglamorous, essential, marginal work of paying attention to the ones the models missed, of writing it down, of building toward a shape they still couldn't fully see, was nowhere near done. It was, in fact, just beginning. She thought, for no reason she could have explained, good. The building hummed around her, servers and ventilation and the very faint carrier frequency of something vast and patient listening from an unimaginable distance, and she walked back to her office and sat down and opened the notebook and kept reading.